Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon, Sea of Tranquility, 1969, Apollo 11. Over the decades, he hinted at several things. One, that aliens are living right now in bases on Antarctica and under the ocean. His words, not mine. The second, that the moon landing in 1969 never actually happened. The third, and most interesting, I think, is that on the dark side of the moon doesn't spin like the Earth. When they orbited in Apollo 11, they photographed and saw with their own eyes structures that clearly were built by somebody. Can you confirm or deny any of that?
All right, check this out. New research suggests that 2 Grand Canyon-sized valleys on the moon formed within just 10 minutes. And how long did it take for us?
Millions of years. Yeah,
Exactly.
the Colorado River carved that thing out.
Yeah, so scientists say it happened about 3.8 billion years ago.
So again, the Grand Canyon, millions of years. The massive canyons are hidden on the far side of the moon, the lunar South Pole, where NASA's Artemis 3 mission aims to land humans, fingers crossed, next year. Wouldn't that be fun when we go back to the moon?
Yeah, it is. It is. I always think it's interesting how they know something was billions of years ago, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, are they really sure about that? How do we know that?
Yeah, they date things.
I was going to say, they're experts.
They know.
In the millions of years, they look at the sandstone, right, and the carvings of the water.
I just can't believe it took 10 minutes to form Grand Canyon-like.
That sounds like a...
I know, yes.
fish
It's probably
like a rip.
minuscule there on the moon, right? It's huge for us.
All right, hey, what's coming up at 5?
Yes, guys, here's what we have coming up at 5.
I can absolutely confirm we did go to the moon, but when we went, we weren't alone, and that was known prior to the 1969 moon landing, and I'll tell you why. If you go to our Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive, dpiarchive.com, you'll see, and it's free to go there, you'll see the testimony of Carl Wolf, who in 1968 was at a National Security Agency relay station at Langley Air Force Base.
Carl Wolf was killed, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was killed. I mean, we've had a lot of losses.
Run over by a truck or something like that? Mysteriously?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Dr. Brewer, we're just very tight on time. I have one. Go ahead.
I was mysteriously almost killed about 14 months ago. But my point is that these, when they did the lunar orbiter, where they were mapping, where they were going to planning to land, there were these structures that were seen, and he came forward with that 25 years ago at the first Disclosure Project press conference in May of 2001. So we've known about this for some time, and he actually saw the images, the early digital photographs, and what have you of those structures. So
it's
we
just
know that there's, and this is all going to eventually come out.
Let me just ask you. We're so tight on time, Dr. Greer.
That's what experts say. That we humans who are shooting for the moon could damage it, which is a bit of a shock, considering how we feel about the moon. We are low-key obsessed with it. For centuries, it has been a source of fascination, a thing of legend. Many cultures called it a deity. We believe that it controlled our moods, our behaviors, and even our destinies. The moon has found its way into myths, art, literature, lullabies, and of course, Bollywood songs. But as technology developed, our relationship with the moon began to change. It started in 1609, when Galileo Galilei used his new telescope. He looked at the moon, then he grabbed his watercolors and painted the cratered surface. This was the first time humanity learned what the moon actually looked like. Then came the moon race. It began in 1959 when the Soviet probes got the first close-up pictures of the moon. In 1969, humans got much closer with the Apollo 11. The US landed humans on the moon, and this alien world turned more familiar. That's when astronauts first walked on the moon. It was in one lunar location, the Tranquility Base. That's what the place is called, where Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked. And do you know what happened next? They left footprints there on the moon. You can still see them. They also left behind 106 artifacts, tools, food packaging, wet wipes, 100 packets of urine and excrement. Apollo 11 was an engineering milestone. Its achievement inspired global wonder.
Donald Trump says he is determined the US will return to the moon during his presidency. In just over 2 years, NASA's Artemis 3 mission is due to put humans back on the lunar surface for the first time in more than 50 years. A mission to Mars is also slated to follow if the moon landing is successful. But mounting astronomical costs and the threat China could land on the moon before the US could see Elon Musk's current economy drive stretch to the space race. Tom Clark has the details.
For more than a decade, America has been planning to send humans back to the moon. It didn't start out as a race, but China is now hot on America's heels with plans to put people on the lunar surface too. But today's America couldn't be more different from the one that sent Apollo astronauts to the moon.
It mentions a surprising new locale, the moon, the desolate, cratered wasteland, the Earth's only natural satellite. Now it is an endangered cultural site. The fund says that 90 places on the moon are threatened, and the moon needs our protection. Against what exactly? Well, there is a list for that as well. A space race on steroids, governments desperate for human space flight, over-tourism extending to lunar landscapes.
For more than a decade, America has been planning to send humans back to the moon. It didn't start out as a race, but China is now hot on America's heels with plans to put people on the lunar surface too. But today's America couldn't be more different from the one that sent Apollo astronauts to the moon. Private firms like SpaceX now dominate in terms of technology and efficiency. SpaceX boss Elon Musk doesn't just stand to benefit. Donald Trump has put him in charge of government efficiency. So where does that leave NASA's overdue and over-budget moon plans?
And liftoff of Artemis 1.
That project, called Artemis, used the giant Space Launch Systems rocket to send an uncrewed test flight around the moon and back. The first crewed moon landing is planned for 2027, but it's way more complicated than Apollo. A spacecraft called Orion, with a crew of 4 astronauts, will be blasted by the SLS rocket towards the moon. Waiting in lunar orbit is a human landing system, a modified SpaceX Starship, into which 2 astronauts transfer. Down go the landing party onto the moon's south pole for a 6.5-day mission. The astronauts then blast off to rejoin their crewmates in Orion and all travel back together to Earth after 30 days in space. Now, if you think all that's convoluted, you're not alone. This guy, performing the first privately funded spacewalk from a SpaceX capsule, is Jared Isaacman, Donald Trump's pick to be the next NASA administrator. He's a fan of moon missions, but critical of the expensive contracts with established defence firms that have bedeviled the Artemis programme. Most notably, this beast, the $23 billion SLS. The only rocket big enough to get the Orion capsule all the way to the moon in one launch. But what NASA doesn't mention is it's not big enough to get them onto the moon and home again, hence the need for all that crazy changing trains in lunar orbit stuff. And now there are alternatives. Take Elon Musk's Starship, not specifically designed for the moon, but potentially cheaper because it's reusable. Then there's billionaire Jeff Bezos's Blue Origin with its New Glenn rocket, another partly reusable potential alternative to SLS.
If you're coming into the government with a mandate to seek government efficiency, that is a NASA poster child for inefficiency. I mean, it should not take 12 years and $20 to $25 billion to take existing space shuttle hardware and modify it into a different rocket.
And here's the dilemma for Donald Trump. Leaving Artemis alone undermines his cost-cutting agenda, but ditching bits of it late in the game might mean delays and China getting to the moon before them, something Trump is unlikely to accept. One solution: move the goalposts and go for a crewed mission to Mars. Mind-blowingly expensive for US taxpayers, but one that could please his tech billionaire backers.